Welcome. Thank you for attending today's webinar hosted by the Organization Development and Change program at Penn State. Today, we have the great pleasure of welcoming our presenter, Dr. Wesley Donahue. My name is Layla Farzam, and I am an alumni ambassador for the Organization Development and Change program. We also have Jenny Lee with us today, who will be managing our Q&A feature. In terms of the interactive portion of our webinar, please open the Q&A feature in the Zoom platform to interact and ask questions for the Q&A segment. If for some reason you get disconnected from our presentation, please use the same Zoom link to re-enter. Our online Master of Professional Studies in Organization Development and Change can help you prepare to implement quality and continuous improvement initiatives in an organization. Furthermore, there is a Ph.D. program in Workforce Education and Development with a concentration in HRD and OD. Our program has created a continuous 6-series monthly webinar series from experts around the world. Today, we welcome Dr. Donahue.
Dr. Donahue is a professor of education at Penn State University. In this capacity, he is engaged in top-ranked graduate research and programming in learning and performance, and leads a successful online graduate program in organization development and change. Dr. Donahue is also president of CenterStar Incorporated, a firm that produces and delivers competency-based leadership development-related short courses for professionals. As a business owner, engineer, manager, and now an educator, Dr. Donahue has always been in the business of helping other people succeed. But like most leaders, at each step of the way, he had to learn and had to put that learning into action. His work in the field of leadership speaks from the voice of experience. Here's Dr. Donahue.
Thanks, Jenny, and thanks, Layla. Looking at from an education standpoint, I've been involved in the education arena actually for the last 30 years, but that was after a career in corporate America, where I had various, as Jenny mentioned, a number of different roles. And from that, I've created a lot of short courses along the way, co-authored a book on technical sales, and most recently, a book on building leadership competence. But most importantly, my role at Penn State right now is I'm the coordinator of the online Master of Organization Development and Change. And you can see a number of courses. I actually facilitate the capstone course for all of our students, teach needs assessment, still have my finger in some engineering leadership and innovation courses. But most importantly to us today, I teach a course, Leadership Competencies for Professionals, in our online master's program. And the contents of this presentation today are really embedded in that course. So if you were a student in our program, you'd hear some of this again. But so thanks for attending. As Layla mentioned, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to put them in that particular spot. Also, the presentation will be recorded and you'll be able to view it or a portion of it at a later time. So without further ado, looking at why should you care about this presentation today? And that's a good question for everybody. With a number of reasons. Why? One, whether you like it or not, you're in charge of your career. It's not like it used to be in the olden days. Today, I've been bought and sold in corporate America. I know it's no fun. I know I'm in charge of my career as well. So think about that. I assume everyone wants to improve. I know I do. The other thing is you're a role model, whether you like it or not. Whether you have formal leadership responsibilities or not, people are watching your every action. So you've got to think about that. Are you being a positive image or not so positive? And of course, looking at your career and looking ahead, do you use any kind of simple framework to guide your progression or your career ahead? Do you have a roadmap to follow? And of course, leading others. You may or may not have formal leadership responsibilities, but I'm sure you influence others either formally or informally all the time. So kind of my goals for today with the presentation is to start you thinking about competency models, and using them as a framework to build your path forward. I want to stress the importance, though, of doing a little soul searching and identifying what's of value to you. What are your goals? What's your strengths? And where are the areas where, perhaps you want to grow a little bit. The other thing I want to point out is looking ahead in any kind of career progression. A lot of times people make the mistake of taking on too much. So one of the things I want to focus on is having you zero in on one or two or three competencies that are important to you either in your current job or your target future job. And then as you go from that, thinking about the resource, you have many resources at your fingertips that I'll get into here as well. And of course, I want to encourage you to start or continue with building your leadership competency plans. So for today, I've actually taken the presentation and segmented into 10 key concepts, finding your path forward, really learning about yourself, your goals, and so forth, planning your career, describing the job responsibilities, and that could be your current job or your future target job, leadership position. Learn a little bit about competency modeling. There's a lot done on it. How can you use what's already been done to your advantage in planning out your career for success, however you define success? I'll also look at that from a little different perspective because there has been a lot of research on competencies, what competencies are important at different leadership levels. We'll touch on that. And then get into action planning. And with this, I'll actually have an 8-page booklet that, if you'd like, we'll be happy to send you a complimentary copy that has action plan templates in it for your use. Further in the presentation, a little bit, I'll touch on some of the real-life leaders, people that could help you in your career. But also, we can't forget the lessons in nature. There's a lot of things around us that happen that maybe we take for granted that I think can help us all. Then I'll switch gears a little bit from an individual perspective to an organization development perspective. The same tools we're going to talk about here apply for you as a leader if you want to use them. So really looking at your path forward here, there's a saying, if you don't know where you're going or where you're headed, any road will take you there. So you start thinking about it. Do you have a roadmap to follow? Looking ahead. And of course, the problem with many of the roadmaps, they can be very difficult and complicated to follow. So one of the things we've created is I'll say it's a simple map, a simple model that we've assembled from years of research. And with this research, it's been the underpinning it is many years of research in both the public and the private sector that helps us in our journey. But before I get into the model too much, I want to step back and look at core values, because we could talk about leadership all we want, but what do you value in life? What are your goals and so forth? So I don't want to lose sight of the core values. And with those core values, what is important for you to consider? What do you value in the workplace? What's important in your career? And the reality is values and beliefs are at the heart of leadership. And how you spend your time is how you spend your life. So if you're going to spend working on a leadership career, hopefully it's with an organization that is aligned with what you value the most. And of course, values depends on who's trying to define them. And we've looked at values, which are really to individuals, codes that people live by, but also with organizations, hopefully they adhere to them, and that's how they achieve their mission. We've looked at many different value statements in many, many different organizations. So I have a listing here of some of the ones that we've taken straight from value statements. Honesty, respect, human dignity. Some people have fun as one of their values, and I think that's a good one. Meaningful work. We all want to think that we're working on something meaningful. Do the people we work with, do they work with integrity? Are they positive? Do you have a positive work attitude? Do they drive for results? Quality, quality, very important. You hear innovation all the time. Does your organization, does it really value it? Safe working conditions is the same thing. You think about how important they are to everybody. And of course, excellence, customer excellence, constituent excellence, and contribution to society. Is it the greater good you're also concerned about? Your community, ethics, all very important in looking at your career. I can't stress the importance that identifying the values that are important to you, and of course to others. The ones shown in blue, incidentally, are, if you looked at Penn State's value statement, the ones in blue are what they list as Penn State's values. So all of this is kind of the backdrop in looking at building your leadership competence. But what is a competency? You think about that. That's a term we hear all the time. We hear competency-based education. We hear competency-based job descriptions and so forth. So really, for purposes of this presentation, I'm going to define competencies as measurable and observable knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behaviors critical to successful performance. So you can also say KSABs. You've probably heard that term many times in the past, but for the purpose of this presentation, that's what we're going to define it. And of course, at various levels, you can see that various competencies become more important. And that's why we're looking at, in researching the literature, both in the public and private domain, what could we put together that you could use? And based from our research, we've defined and we've taken and boiled it down to a number of competencies. And with the model you see to the left, you'll see it's kind of looks like a star. And with that, we've taken 35 competencies and we've actually put them into 5 functional areas, you could say domains or clusters. And these are those main areas: resource management, professional competence, supervisory, organizational, and technical. So those are the main clusters. And then, of course, the 35 competencies are all aligned with one of those cluster areas. And the question you're probably asking yourself, well, 35 competencies, what are they? How are they determined, and so forth? And in order to answer that question, we have to take a little sidestep into a little bit thing called critical incident technique, critical incident theory. I don't know if you're familiar with that or heard of that before, but it's really at the heart of competency modeling. And you think of where did it come from? It really has its roots back in the military. And the military started looking at leadership. And believe me, the military are experts at leadership. And so you have a lot of other people that militaries are experts. So looking at all the literature that's been done by the military in years gone by, one of the things is a critical incident approach, where they were looking at why are some leaders at different levels more successful than others. So they studied them. They observed them. They're looking at why. And of course, this whole process of critical incident approach and this technique is inherent by trying to obtain facts about situations, a critical incident. So a critical incident could be a situation, an event that occurred, and what you're looking at is trying to observe what is that event, what happened, asking the person who was involved the critical events with it. Tell us a story of what happened, what went wrong, what would you do differently, with the idea that you're going to determine the facts, the issues, the underlying competencies, which again, what were the skills, knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors that leader demonstrated. And of course, for purposes of our presentation here, we're trying to look at exemplary leaders. Now you could look at the opposite side also, those that weren't so successful, and you look at the negative side so that you don't redo some of those lessons of the past. But you know, for us here, looking at exemplary, we're trying to look at the top performers so that we can emulate what they do. But this is from a leadership perspective. The competencies, you'll hear it in different ways too. For anybody that's looked at LinkedIn, looked at job descriptions, you'll see that many jobs, they'll say it, they'll have competency-based descriptions. They may have the skills, abilities, and so forth, but they're looking for people in particular organizations. And in this case, they're really, with competency-based job descriptions, typically it's the functional competencies. You know, what are the functional things they want a particular person to do? So with this, though, it's important if you're looking at your particular position or one in the future, you know, what job is it? What position is it? What's the target? What are the goals? What are your goals? What is it you want to achieve? So that's why, what were your values and what are your goals, and trying to make sure that you write them down. Well, that sounds easy. And of course, you know, your goals, your career aspirations, you know, how many of you actually have written them down? Well, and how many have put them in a SMART format? Well, according to the research, there's only about 3% of the population that actually set goals. You think about that. Kind of sad, but only 3%. The research also says only about 1% ever write them down. So only about 1% really write their goals down. We talk about them, but you know, do they really write them? And do they put them in a SMART format? Well, SMART format, you may or may not have heard that term before, but you know, are they specific? Are they measurable, attainable, relevant, time-based? You know, if you're like me, I make a goal every year at New Year's, you know, I'm going to lose 20 pounds, you know, and is that a goal? Is that a SMART goal? Or maybe I say I want to be rich. You know, that's a goal. Well, what does that mean? You know, is that a SMART goal? What does rich mean? So really start looking at your goals. You have to take it a little deeper, and you have to think, well, we need a lot more information. You know, so I could rephrase that term, I want to be rich, and I could say, well, to me, I want to pay off my house. I want to have $1 million in the bank by the time I'm 62. So I have more time for my family and to travel. So with that, I'm trying to zero in what specifically is it that I'm looking to do. And that's really what a SMART goal is. So I would encourage you to think about, what are your goals? Can you frame them up as SMART goals? And then that leads us to whatever position you're looking at, what's important to that position? You know, what are the things that are going to make you successful? What are the responsibilities of the job? And that gets us to looking at job responsibilities and competencies. And there's no one set of job skills or whatever that is going to be universal across all jobs. But from a leadership perspective, and you can look at different leadership levels and general skill sets, in all leadership positions, there's technical, human, and conceptual skills that are necessary. And if you start at the individual contributor level, you see, you know, the technical piece of this is very important. And And in all the leadership levels, the human aspect, because leadership's dealing with human beings. So you can see it's important. And of course, at the executive level, you see that conceptual thinking skills and so forth takes on a whole new meaning. That's not to say that technical skills aren't important at the executive level, but this is just a generalization of some of the proportion of skills. But some organizations have and I call them pretty smart organizations actually, take this a step further. And they really try to define particular jobs. They're looking at the details of them, and what they've created is customized occupational profiles. And you think of an organization, how many times first they say, hey, we're going to have a succession management or succession planning program, but yet they have people retiring after 40 years walk out the door, and they haven't captured the intellectual I'll call it intellectual capital of those individuals. How sad that is. Or a lot of corporate takeovers that occur. You think about they're not really in any structured way capturing the knowledge of the workforce. So one way of doing this, though, is we call it customized occupational profile. We also call it a COP. COP is an acronym for it. But what we do with this is and this is a process that if you do want to, for succession management, succession planning, capture your critical job position functions, here's a process. The first thing you want to do is assemble your top performers. Yeah, we could assemble regular performers, but we want the top. We want to know, what are the good ones doing? What are the exemplary performers doing? So you get those together in we call it the Customized Occupational Profile COP session. This is a facilitated session whereby you're asking, and this is structured where you plan it out. What are the main duties with a job? And with that group, do they agree with the main duties? And then looking at the tasks and so forth, responsibilities associated with it, asking the experts, the people in the room. And from this, we create a matrix that has not only the tasks, but we're looking at what are the qualifications for the job, what are the performance factors. If you're going to do orientation or onboarding, what are the key things you want to do right up front? And then, of course, what are the roles, responsibilities, and competencies associated with this? So typically in a session like this, you would facilitate it, and the individual, many times the facilitator, would then create a draft of this chart based on what they heard from the group. And then from that would feed that back to the group to really verify, is this what you said? Make any corrections and so forth. And from this, then a lot of other derivative products could fall out of it. This could be job descriptions, onboarding plans. It could be coaching plans, of course, performance appraisals, and so forth. Now, at Penn State, we used to have a room at our Penn State Conference Center, the Penn Stater, where we actually brought people in and facilitated sessions like this, because we've done it not only for positions, but industries as well, with plastics, with some of the healthcare and other industries. And it used to be, as I said, we brought the exemplary performers in, and well, the negatives of that was travel and everything else. Today, we do this virtually, and we have a system, a software solution called Meeting Sphere that we use, and it's I think a pretty dynamic process. But this is for organizations that really want to take succession management seriously, at least in my opinion. But there's also a lot of other information that's publicly available. You just have to know where to look. So I've also seen a lot of organizations that their job descriptions are, I don't want to say pretty sad, but they're pretty sad. When in fact, if they looked at some of the information that's available, I don't know how many are familiar with the occupational network. This is actually online. It's called ONET. And you can see the link there, oneonline.org. And if you just Google occupational network, this is going to come up. And this is really the federal government's, the Department of Labor's primary place to house labor kind of information related to occupations. And what they have for many different occupations, here's an example like a human resource manager. It spells out, here's the tasks involved in that, here's technology skills, and there's a wealth of information available for that particular job. And they have many, many different jobs there. So I would encourage you, go look. Whatever job you want to take or looking at, or your existing job, there's probably automatically information on it that is available to you. The other thing is from occupational resources, we're starting to talk about competencies, and I showed you our simple model, but the simple models actually derive from a lot of other work that's already been done. And the other kind of resource is the Competency Clearinghouse. Again, it's a federal government, it's all free resources for you. And if you Google Competency Clearinghouse or Career One Stop, you're going to see a little pyramid that looks like this with foundational, industry, and occupational related competencies. And this is a good starting place, but there's more. If you go into the site, you'll find that they have some generic models that are really pretty detailed. If you look here, it shows personal effectiveness competencies. If you look at across the bottom, interpersonal skills, integrity, professionalism, and so forth. As you go up into the middle, you'll see academic, workplace, industry, and so forth. And at the top, you'll see management competencies and occupation specific. But there's more. They've also done, a lot of specific competency models for industries where they've had the industry experts come together. So whether it's construction, energy, healthcare, there's actually specific models that you can just go online, you can pull them up for those different industries. And it also gives you the ability to build your own competency model. So these are all resources that are available at your disposal. You can go into them. They're free resources. But of course, if you're like me and many others, sometimes you get a little overwhelmed by all of this. And you can sometimes lose sight of the forest for all the trees in front of you, basically. So that was kind of the reason why we assembled the model we did, because we were looking at how do we simplify this? If we wanted to help people in their careers, is there something simpler? That's why we created and assembled this 5-star model. It's really based, the underpinning, this is aligned with all those other models, the underpinning. So the Department of Labor and so forth. But with this, though, it gives us a little basis. And what we've done is we've actually used this model with, I'll say there's literally thousands. We've had thousands of people who have taken a simple inventory that we have, the 35 competency inventory, across hundreds of different organizations. And we've had several doctoral students who've written their doctoral dissertation around aspects of the model. Now, obviously, in today's session, we can't, don't have the time to cover this model in depth, but, if you did want to learn a little bit more about it, we have a little, I will say, a special offer for you, but we have a complimentary 8-page booklet that we would be happy to send you that explains each of the 35 competencies, and there's some worksheets in it for development plans and so forth, but there's also a 3-part form. And the 3-part form's meant for you to analytically go through the 35 competencies and assess yourself. How important is each competency to your career or the job you're looking at, and how much development need do you have? And of course, it's a self-perception booklet, but what we're trying to do with this is focus you and prioritize the competencies. But for sake of today, I'd like you to just look at, here's 32 of the 35 competencies. The 3 that are missing are job-specific competencies, occupation-specific technical competencies, and industry technical competencies. But The 32 here are focused on leadership. And what I'd like you to do is take a minute here, just scan through these. Is there any that stick out to you that you would want to focus on for your development efforts? Maybe it's leadership and coaching, maybe it's problem solving or technical competence, vision, so forth. The booklet itself, though, is going to take you through the analytical process to narrow it down to what do you want to focus on? Because I mentioned early on in the presentation, one of the mistakes people make is they try to solve world hunger and they try to solve everything at one time when in fact, if you want to be successful, you need to focus. So what are the 2 or 3 competencies that you want to spend the next several weeks or months focused on, and then what do you do about it? So with this, we want to have you do this. I said there's an email that if you just the Penn State ODC program at gmail.com. So it's just Penn State ODC program at gmail.com. If you supply your name and address, we'll send you this booklet. And then you can go through the process yourself. But with this, looking at this, this is kind of an analytical way, and we want you to do this first before looking at leadership in a different way. But the different way we could look at this from years of research is we've actually mentioned we've surveyed thousands of individuals and hundreds of organizations. That's given us the ability to look at it from a leadership level standpoint. What competencies are important at different levels and so forth. And you can see the level from individual contributors to the senior leaders or executives. So what we've done is we've taken the 35 competencies and the research, we've put them in a different way. So here's a stratified chart. And same 35 competencies in that STAR model. And if you look at them here, you'll see that at this bottom level, let's say the individual contributor, there's competencies across the bottom, computer and basic literacy, conceptual thinking skills, learning information systems, self-responsibility, interpersonal skills, technical competence, resource usage, systems orientation. And by that I mean is, how does the organization work? Someone coming in at the individual contributor level, they're going to be working in teams, they're going to be working other things. There's some basic competencies that they ought to be, they're pretty important to them. Then as you move to different levels, let's say the frontline supervisor, the next one up, other things become important. There's oral communication, written communication, interpersonal relationship building, leadership, coaching, flexibility, problem solving, and so forth. Then as you go up, looking at functional manager, you have diverse workforce, conflict, teamwork, and so forth. Move to the director level, planning, evaluation, customer focus, financial management, and so forth. And then at the executive or senior level, you see vision, external awareness, strategic planning, managing change. Now, an important aspect here is there's overlap in all of these. And I'm not saying that oral communication that I have shown there in the red circle isn't important at all levels. It is. However, when you look at the job of a frontline supervisor, they're typically the main communication link in any organization. They spend 70-80% of their time communicating. Now, that may not be given formal talks, but they're talking job direction, so forth. So oral communication is very important at that level. So you see a model like this is particularly helpful in developing curriculum or curricula for various levels. So, and when I end the presentation talking about at the organization development level, this research becomes very important because if we're going to start developing programs, what's it based on? And do people have buy-in? Way off to the right, you see the different level, the different kind of competencies from a technical aspect as well. So this is just one way of looking at it, and all of this is back to helping you looking at plan your work ahead, plan your career ahead. So the underpinning of this, and we're trying to do with the booklet, was have you to identify from an analytical standpoint, what are the 2 or 3 competencies that you want to focus on? What's important to you in your, either in your existing leadership career or the one that you're looking ahead to? And then, of course, with that, the booklet will share competency descriptions, resources, what resources are ahead, and I'm going to get into that in a minute, what's important to you. What about the people involved? Are there people to help you with your journey? And of course, what's your timeline? What are tips? And I show that actually the book that I wrote, I go into all the competencies, each competency, and I have a description of it, resources, identify some people, and action tips as well. But all of this, when you think about what resources are at your fingertips, there's a lot. There are a lot of resources, and many of them are, they're free resources. Books, magazines, journals. You think about all the things that you have that can help you. Internet, the vast, you can spend your life surfing the internet, the webinars such as this. But there's seminars, independent study, podcasts, music, TV, a lot of lessons depending on what movies you're watching, what job aids, worksheets, case studies that you can look at. And of course, others, maybe you're going, looking at role models, who in your organization, each competency or the ones that you want to focus on, who's good at it? What are they doing? What can you learn from them? Friends, family, personal network, who's there that you know? And typically in what I do in a lot of classes that I teach, peers and coworkers, I actually have an activity where I have the people go through the same kind of booklet, identify their 2 or 3 competencies. Then I say, okay, I'm going to give you, we're going to have a 12-minute activity where I say, for 6 minutes, you're going to be the expert helping others. And for 6 minutes, you're going to learn from 3 other people. And what I do is pair them up, and for 4 minutes, I say 2 minutes, share your 3 competencies, 2 or 3 competencies. Now listen. And that other person is going to share with them what they do or insights as far as helping that individual with their competency. Then I say, okay, at the end of the 2 minutes, switch. And so they switch roles. So for the 2 minutes, one person's the expert, and for 2 minutes, they're listening. I do that 3 times. And so you think about it, with your peers, within a 12-minute period, you were the expert for 6, and you got 6 minutes worth of free consulting from your colleagues. So that's an activity I do with peers and colleagues, but also mentors. I have some undergraduate students. I say, hey, one thing I would do again differently, looking at jobs, if before I said yes, I would ask the person making the offer, hey, I would like to have a mentor assigned to me. Well, guess what? That's going to be a little perplexing question to many people. They're not used to hearing that. But you think about it. It costs an organization nothing to offer or assign you a mentor. And of course, you think about the politics, how critical it is to somebody in a new organization to know the political landscape. So having a mentor to help you navigate that is worth its weight in gold. So there's a lot of free information out there for you, but also exemplary leaders, famous leaders. Who's good at it? Who's good at certain things? So one of the things I did is looking at many great leaders. They have traits. You can look at historically, and of course traits are really more personality styles than anything. But there's certain people that are good at certain things and maybe not so good at other things. But let's look at some exemplary performers and what qualities they have. And you may have these same qualities. You may not even be thinking about them, but how do you build upon your own qualities, and then how do you learn from others. So with this, in the book, I have, here's JFK, President Kennedy. And of course, I could have had him as being an exemplary performer in communication, because he was and is. Oral communication is great. But I have his technical competence in the book. It's like, why him for technical competence? Well, if you really look at him and analyze what he did as a president, he was the first president to really successfully use television. Now, there are others that tried, but he had a natural charisma about him that he saw up front that television influenced a lot of people, and he became a master at using it. Another one comes to mind, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Well, I could say he was good at communication too. He had his fireside chats. But you look a little deeper at what he did, and he served as president from 1933 to 44 through some of the darkest chapters of our country. Not only from not only the Depression, but into World War II. And while those were very complex, dark times, what he did with his fireside chat was pretty amazing. And what he did was he actually segmented those into, I would say, into manageable and understandable topics that he could take one piece at a time. So each fireside chat focused on a particular topic. And of course, he's doing that over the radio and very successful at it. And what he was really doing was he was really influencing people to share his vision for the future. And I should say very successfully did that as well. A more contemporary person, Elon Musk, we hear his name in the news a lot these days, being the chairman of Tesla and SpaceX. He's very, very dynamic guy. And of course, not only, I'm sure, is he interested in making some money, but he's already a billionaire, so how much do you really need? So really, he's interested, though, in really making a difference. He's one that makes a point that he wants to leave this life a little better than the way he left it. So he's always looking ahead. How can he make things better? And we all know sooner or later electric cars, they're going to take over. It's a matter of time. We know that. So there he is. He saw an opportunity. The other thing from the space, we have a new Space Force, but yet, the whole NASA program was pretty much put on ice a few years ago. He saw an opportunity. And of course, you got to admire a guy like that. He's really in tune with what's happening, the external awareness, where are opportunities and needs. But, we don't have to just look at famous leaders. There's a lot of lessons in nature. And, if I can pull this off, I'm going to share a short video with you about geese. We see them flying in a V all the time, but why are they flying in a V? Is there anything we could learn from geese flying in a V? Well, maybe so. Let's see here. And do we see the video, Layla? So we see the slide here all right?
Yes, perfectly.
And so that video, you think about the lessons from that. And did everybody able to hear the video okay? Okay.
Perfect.
But, and if you look at, you think about the lessons there, the geese share leadership. Why don't we do that? Why don't we help each other as leaders more? So there's a lot of lessons we could learn, just from watching the geese. And of course, that's a YouTube. You can go on YouTube and you can actually just say the wisdom of geese and you'll pick up that video. But there are other things. And I could have used geese as teamwork and cooperation, but in the book I have wolves. Wolves, of course, teamwork. Obviously, they travel 50 miles a day looking for food. The other thing people don't realize is they rear their young and together. They bring in the food collectively, they protect each other. So they really work as a team. And it's really kind of amazing when you think about it. But they're not alone in some of the things. Now here's a tortoise. And the tortoise, of course, the tortoise mainly lives on land. A turtle mainly lives in water. But some tortoises have been known to live 100 years and some rumored 200 years. They've also not been known to have a very, very large brain. So why do I have this strategic thinking and planning? Well, a couple reasons. For people who have studied the tortoise, they find that they use environmental landmarks to systematically and strategically hunt for food. They hunt in a kind of radial fashion. And it's kind of amazing that, something that big can live for 100 plus years and survive and so forth. And another one, squirrels. Of course, we all see the squirrels every day, and planning an evaluation I have them for. But they hoard their nuts. But the other thing about squirrels that's kind of amazing is they're also pretty good at telling the weather. They plan their time. They take action. The crow is pretty well known for creative thinking. And there's a lot of problem solving, and there's tests that they've done with studying crows to solve problems. And of course, the elephant. The elephant is really a relationship kind of animal. They're very emotional. And I don't know how many people really know that, but they really connect with others. And I don't know how many have watched the video of watching the elephant paint. And if you haven't, here's a picture. You see it here. You see the trunk of the elephant. He's actually painting that tree with the flowers. And off to the right, he painted two elephants walking away. That elephant painted that painting. I'm just still blown away by that myself. But if you want to see that, just Google elephant painting. And you think, wow, how much we don't understand about some of the nature and some of the lessons that we could learn from things around us. So with that, though, moving on to kind of the last segment of this presentation, I've talked a lot about leadership from an individual standpoint and the competencies and the tools. But, today's employees, they want to be part of something they believe in, as do I. I want to believe in it as well. They don't just want to be told what to do. One of the things the leaders forget sometimes is you really want to know what's on the mind of employees, ask them. And that's one of the things about our organization development and change program. Our program's a bottoms-up organization development and change facilitative kind of program. So some of the tools that we use are pretty important. But one, looking at this inventory and how can it be used for organization development? Well, a couple different aspects. Well, for those of you who are familiar with multi-rater 360 feedback tools, it can be used in that kind of application. It could also be used as a group perception tool to gather aggregate information from target groups. So you're asking groups what they think about leadership competencies, and then you're you're aggregating it together to see what the trends and patterns are. And then you could also do that for multiple groups and use this tool as a comparison. So some examples, there's that same kind of 35 competencies. And if we were going to use this for a multi-rater tool, this is an actual report here from a sample from a report I did. An organization wanted to, actually it was used for selection for their emerging leader program. So they had quite a few people wanted in the program, and so they administered the competency program or the inventory to the individuals, but they also had coaches that were assigned to these individuals, sponsors and partners. It was a very large company. And then they evaluated it. You can see that in a multi-rater feedback, you're getting the self-report and you're getting others. But this would also be done as a coaching tool, looking at what's the perception of the individual and peers and so forth. So that's one particular application, self and so forth. Another is I mentioned using with target groups. So let's say we want to do a leadership, supervisory leadership. So what we would go in and do would be survey the target group, let's say a sampling of supervisors, and then we would then look at, okay, have a parallel inventory with a little slight verbiage description that's a different, having the management group of that target group, what do you think they need? How important are these competencies, and how much development need do that target group have? And then compare them. So in this you see, the red is what the target group thought they needed, their importance. So let's just take that technical acumen you see there, and then you see the management group, the blue, there's a big gap. And of course, what is that gap? Why? Obviously the management group expects a little more out of that target group. We could do this at the individual competency level as well. So we could say, here's technology management. You see the gap, the perception of the management group has higher expectations of need and importance than the target group does. And you can see this also in external awareness and so forth. The importance of this is those gaps are explainable. So from an organization development standpoint, if we're going to do a training intervention, one of the biggest things I want to happen is I want the management group to come in and explain to the target group that gap. And it usually is pretty easily explainable when it's in change management, because in change management, which is important piece of our program, master's program as well, is a lot of times, communication at different levels in the change process is quite different. A lot of times the leadership group is already implementing or maybe even onto a new change, and the rank and file employees haven't even heard about it yet. And of course, they're busy doing their own job. So that disconnect is usually explainable. And in order of transparency and honesty, we want the group to come in and talk about it. So this is a tool that really facilitates that communication process. But, as I conclude here and wind this down, competencies are very important. And it's important for you to, as I said here, to look at you're in charge of your career and to continually develop yourself. And kind of to recap, if you're going to start your path forward is, do you have a framework? How are you going to follow? Where's your roadmap? It's important to look at your goals. What's important to you? What do you value? And what kind of job or position are you really looking for? Otherwise, it doesn't matter. Any position will do. But it matters, put your goals down. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? But let's focus on the strengths. What are the things you really want to be good at? And of course, you don't want to solve world hunger. You want to keep focused. What are the one or two or three things that you could really start working on today and over the next couple of weeks or months? And then where are the resources available, not only from famous leaders, but also nature? And as mentioned, there's lots of free resources to help you. And the important thing is you're in charge of your career and those efforts, and we all want to continuously get better. So with that, I thank everybody for joining us today. Here are the links that I talked about in the presentation. Again, they'll be in the recording if you wanted to look at them. The first one's to our degree program, the one-stop ONET, the career modeling one. And again, you can just Google these terms, ONET or career modeling, and you'll get them. The Geese video. And if you want the free inventory, Penn State ODC program at gmail.com. Just send us your name and address, and we'll be happy to send you that. So with that, thank you very much, and I'll turn it back to Layla.
Hi, Dr. Donahue. So some of the questions are around what's the difference between organization development and organizational development?
And that's an excellent question. In fact, I looked at one of the questions, changing needs in business, and how do you, it's dynamic, it's always changing, and what do you do about it? And I should mention that one of the things that sets our program a little bit apart from others, ours is organization development versus organizational development, the AL, organization versus organizational. And it might be a little subtle difference, but it's a big difference in what we're talking about. Organization development, our program, is really a facilitated bottoms-up approach to change versus a top-down. Organizational development is a top-down approach. I could use an analogy with that. Organizational development is kind of like going to a medical doctor. You go in, they look at you, they ask you a few questions, they diagnose, they give you a prescription, you're on your way. Top-down approach to change. Ours is more of a clinical psychologist approach. Questioning, you want to go from A to B? Well, what makes you think you're at A? And how about B or C? And it's really the bottoms-up approach, asking really the experts in the organization, which is really the people doing the job. So if you look at how our program is structured, it's quite different. It's looking at appreciative inquiry, looking for the good in people, facilitating groups and teams, process consultation, and so forth. So it's the whole focus is quite different. And it reminds me of the legendary Jack Welch, who if he was going to buy machine tools, he never had engineers do it. He went to the floor to have people that were actually doing the work buy those kinds of things. One of the other things in the presentation here, I showed some of the famous leaders, and I didn't mean to just show three men. Basically, in my book, I have quite a number of interesting folks there, from Clara Barton, in charge of the Red Cross, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, Angelique Jolie. She's an interesting case study. I would encourage you to study a little bit what she was doing. And of course, Anne Sullivan, with Helen Keller. So there are a lot of leaders out there, and it's who do you admire, and what do you value, and what are they doing differently that can help you? So that's I think we're just about out of time. As I mentioned, you can the booklet you can certainly obtain. It's free there for you. And any questions you have, feel free to email us anytime, and we'd like to help. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Donahue for sharing his knowledge, expertise, and wisdom with us today. If we did not get to your question, as Dr. Donahue mentioned, please feel free to send us an email, which you can find on your screen. On behalf of the OD&C program, we hope you found this webinar helpful. Registrations for all other events can be found on our social media platforms. Feel free to visit our website on the screen or email us with any questions. Thank you all for attending today and being an amazing audience with great questions. We hope to have you back on June 26th from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And please feel free to share our webinar series with your networks and social media platforms, as all are welcome and invited. Thanks so much.